So how long have you sort of been following Leeds then?
1970. You know, I remember to the day actually, quarter-final European Cup, and it was like, what had happened there? And it was such a difficult time. And, you know, so I don't know, I just felt so sorry from like most Leeds fans. Is that bit of sadomasochism?
What makes the club so special to you then?
I think it's exactly that. It's this thing about it's like, it's really odd being back in the Premiership. It's a very different feel. So Leeds is a real community, a real club. So actually it's the feeling that goes alongside it. So it's all that mentality. It's all that bit about fatalism, and it can't get any worse, and the hope's terrible. But, you know, it's far, far worse. So it's just everything that goes with it, Aaron. It's just fantastic club, fantastic story. And how people stick with it over the last 20 years, I'll never know. But people do. And it's just when you go into like third division and still get the crowds that they were. And it's just it's just everything about it. It's just very, very special club. And I couldn't, well, it's like most footballers, they wouldn't change if they could, but, you know, people don't. They just stick with Leeds.
And it's, you know, something that's probably become a bit of a way of life.
Well, I think it's like when there was a few years ago when they nearly went out of business. So when they're down to third, I remember I was on something in London and I was going through what would happen if they didn't exist. So if they didn't exist tomorrow, what would I do? And you just can't think about supporting anybody else. I remember it was very, very real because they could have gone out at that stage before Bates brought them up again. But it was just that stage. You just think, well, what am I going to do? Because it's not the same. If you watch a game as neutral, it's not the same as identifying.
How did you come to get indoctrinated into it?
Well, as I said, it was in the 1970s going through, and then it was that season when it all fell apart when they won the treble. You know, I couldn't go back after that, but really I got into this doing the social media and stuff in, you know, the last 10 years. So I set up this mightyleeds.co.uk website, which is about the definitive history. And then I got into the books about 5-6 years ago because someone approached me off the back of that. So I did one, then I did another one, and then the last couple I've done self-publishing because I really enjoy it. You know, it's stuff that really appeals, and it's the social history as well as the football, and it's just trying to capture that because it is. You know, most people would say this, but it's not like a normal club. Right, wrong, or indifferent. It's not a normal club.
Well, I'll very much come on to that sort of social and cultural in a bit. But what is it from someone who's sort of studied the club as well as supported? But tell me about this rivalry then between Leeds and Chelsea.
Chelsea Leeds.
It's not one that possibly not everyone in the wider world would be explicitly aware of how much the clubs sort of have this rivalry, would they?
So I think it really came to the peak in the 70s when they had the cup final. I'll talk about that in a minute. But going back in the 60s, they were both in the second division and they both came up within about a year or two of each other. And then they had a couple of run-ins. So I think it was early doors when they just started really under and Sprake and they'd come through. There was a really difficult fighting game in that. I think it was about 62, 63. And then when they were both up in the first division, a lot of rivalry. So I know Leeds went out of the cup about 3 years running to Chelsea. So you got the semi-final 67 disallowed goal. Nightmare. So for Leeds, it's awful. Played really well and lost out. But then it came to the fore, as I said, in 1970. So the cup final, we were in dire form at the time. And then we suddenly came really good on the day, Eddie Gray, all over them. Should have won that easily. Then we got into the replay. Again, should have won. One of the dirtiest games ever. And then lost at the death. So, you know, Leeds fans don't forget that or forgive it. And it was from then on. So it was really bizarre when he got Bates coming in, especially as what he'd said before. So I think it was about 80s when the Leeds fans went down Stamford Bridge and wrecked his fencing or his scoreboard and took it to cleaners. So it's bizarre. And some people think he came in to do us to death. But you get that thing, keep the Chelsea out of Leeds, and everyone knew that Dennis Wise had come on, and they hated it, just really hated it. So some of that goes really deep, but it goes back to 60s and 70s, and it's still there today. Still there today.
Obviously, there's the on the pitch rivalry, and we'll talk about that 70 Cup final in a moment.
Yeah.
But a lot sort of cite this as being sort of an early epitome of a sort of north-south divide.
Absolutely. Yeah, so Leeds come up, as I said, in the 60s, and they come up with a Dirty Leeds tag. And certainly the London press really took against them. So it was these dirty northern upstarts from up there. They come up trying to kick our teams, and they got really bad press. And it was epitomised. So Leeds had a similar thing with Arsenal, but certainly Chelsea goes a lot deeper, a lot more historic. And it was, for whatever reason, they really didn't like us, or we said they didn't. So you get this, both sides of that, they despise the other. And it's just grown from there. So you do get Leeds really struggle to win in London even to this day. So you get this constantly. Go on.
Back then, from what I've read, it was a lot of sort of the stereotypes of the sacked up and fancy dance sipping champagne on the King's Road.
Absolutely.
The Leeds gritty Northerners and stuff. I think that sort of played a lot into it, did it?
Yeah, it did. So you actually get through, and it's really interesting. This in 1970. I know we'll come back to that. But actually, Chelsea outdid Leeds at doing what Leeds did. So they kicked us. So second game, they put Harris on Gray, kicked him to death, put him out of the game because Eddie Gray had done that in the first final. So you get this, all the reputation about them. Actually, they got their hard man. So everyone had their hard men at the time. And Chopper Harris, he was probably as worse as any of the Leeds players. But Leeds had more of them. And it's through there. They put him on Eddie Gray, kicked him out of the game in the replay. First game, Eddie Gray took him to the cleaners. So if you looked at it first, actually both of those, you'd say who were the fancy Zans here, who were the decent side, and who were the rough and ready type. And you'd see it the other way around. But I would say that, wouldn't I?
And obviously at that time, Leeds were the best team in the country. The FA Cup huge at that point.
Yeah.
Clubs met 6 times in that 69-70 season. Did it become a bit of a derby of sort?
As far as it can be a derby in different parts of the country, but Leeds in January, they went to Stamford Bridge, won 5-2, and if they'd have saved it for the right time, it could have been really, really good. I don't remember him meeting that quite that many times. They played the League Cup and a couple of others, but they seem to always draw them in the cups. So I said they played through the FA Cup several times, and Leeds never seemed to get one over on Chelsea. It was different in the league, but it was very much cup football, and that's got a different atmosphere from the league. And actually, it's dire. When you get that many times, you get real bogey sides.
And I know it's easy to say, but sort of cups meant more back then, didn't it?
Well, they meant something. It's not like now. It's the second team cups, especially the League Cup. But in then, you'd die to win the FA Cup. I'd never, in those days, dream of missing the Saturday Cup final. But now I rarely remember who's on, never go on, because it's different. It's a different game now. It's all about the Premiership and the money. So the FA Cup, it means nothing to most people. If you get all the way through, it means something for them that get through. But most people are just treated as, something else. It's just Mickey Mouse. You do get the odd giant killing, etc. So some people still get that, but very rarely do you get really big games in the Cup or what's seen as big games. Because the Premier League clubs, it doesn't mean anything to them anymore. The money's in the Premier League in Europe. So actually, it's irrelevant. That's why you get so many poor lineups, reserve lineups, and doing things like decide on penalties in the first game. Never had done that in the early days. I mean, that's one of the reasons 1970 Leeds suffered. They played 3 matches in the semi-finals, and they took now 2 or 3 games in a week. We were playing every other day. That was nightmare. Some of the things they went through then, it was a completely different world. And the Cup really did mean something. So it was one of Revie's ambitions, Don Revie, really desperate to do that. And I remember 72 when they did, Centenary Cup final, couldn't be better. And like Clark 1-0, rally and cry. So yeah, really, really was important in those days. Very important.
And not even just important to the two of you playing, but
that's right.
People wanted to see this. So that final, obviously, 28 million was sort of one of the most watched TV broadcasts in history.
Absolutely.
So what are your memories of that game? Because you said there it's sort of one of the dirtiest games in history.
Well, if we go through, the first game was when Leeds played really well and Chelsea were left running. The second game, that was when Chelsea actually sorted us out. So there was lots of stuff. You get this now. If it was refereed under modern conditions, you'd have about 5 or 6 players sent off and a load of yellow cards. So I think it's David Ellery said that. The first game wasn't like that. It was played on a real pudding pitch, but some really good football. Leeds' best game for probably weeks and weeks and weeks. They really rose. Chelsea were really good as well. very resilient, kept coming back. So I remember the first game, dodgy header from Jack Charlton went in, like the players kicked over the top of it. Then the ball went under Gary Sprake just before half time. Oh, bloody hell. Then second half, we score again. A real fantastic goal. Shut them out. And then they score right at the end. Fantastic game. First replay, I think in about 50, 60 years. First time that's happened. And that was a really great game. Said they played, I think it was the Horse of the Year show had been run at Wembley, and it was dire. It was covered in sand. So it was amazing they were able to play it all. Never mind that. It was one of the games of the season. Got to Old Trafford for the replay. So evening kickoff. And Chelsea set out to kick us out of the game. I firmly believe I would say that anyway. Still a really, really good game. Again, took the lead, allowed them back in, and then right at the death. But that's always has been Leeds. So those were really memorable games. I remember Billy Bremner going in on the area, and Eddie McCready nearly took his head off. So foot-high tackle, and Bremner's on the floor. And the referee's going, I played advantage. Forget advantage, he's decapitated there. So it really was. It was a very different game then. I said, most of the big sides then had got their real hard men, and Chelsea had got their fair share. So John Dempsey, you got, as I said, Harris before, Eddie McCready. Leeds had theirs as well. They could all handle themselves. But it tended to be give and take, and they took it, and they came back. So that thing, if someone had done to Bremner in later years, he'd been sent off. He'd be bloody taken to court for assault. In those days, they just got up and carried on. Absolutely different game.
And it was obviously different on the pitch, but also very much off it. Talk me through a little bit, sort of, where that manifested itself in possibly the wrong ways in terms of sort of the firms of that era.
Okay, well, you got that in all the clubs, I suppose, all the big clubs and even some of the smaller ones. So they talked about firms or the crews and all that type of stuff, and you still get the ultras around that. And it was this bit, it was tribal warfare. So in those days, you went for a ruck in a fight, and a lot of people went for that rather than the football. So it was the tribalism. You hated these other guys. You both knew what you were going to get into. It's when it turned nasty with iron bars and knives, and it was about early 70s that really came in. And I know Leeds really had that later on, but then Man United were the big side for that. They were the first ones where it was really associated. So it started quite good-natured rivalry, a lot of singing across, but there's some pretty nasty songs between them. So get out your gun, shoot the Chelsea scum and all stuff like that. But it wouldn't have been things where they'd take it further on, but it did become real hand-to-hand combat. You get scrapping in the streets out the stadium, you get all the hooliganism, you get all the broken windows, the wrecked gardens in and around. That would be Saturday. Living around near a stadium those days, take your life in your hands. And I think that was generally in football. So I don't believe at that stage Leeds and Chelsea were any different to quite a few. I think when I was growing up, the reputation was all about Man United. Leeds really got it much later on. And I don't think these clubs were any different from the rest, I have to say. It was a real dark time, really dark time.
And you said, obviously, touched on it a little bit before, but you think a little bit the idea of sort of Dirty Leeds was cultivated in those London news reports. Like you call someone an animal, they start behaving like that. The narrative was written and people start performing to it. Yeah,
so it's like anything, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So Leeds were difficult. They were a hard side. They got real hard men and they made no secret about it. But I think Revie overreacted when he came up. So you got this article saying they were the dirty side of the land. He really got paranoid around that. And all that did was make it even worse. So you get this, you protest too much. So it became Dirty Leeds. And for the fans, really, it's almost like a badge of honour. We like to be hated. We like to be despised because it means that we've got our club and we can hate others. Not in the sense of really hating and wanting to do damage to, but it's our identity. This is us, siege mentality. So yeah, still play it up. And I know someone asked me the other day about Dirty Leeds. Is that right? Because it doesn't feel justified. No, but it's our identity. It's what people call us. It's the reality. And actually, and some occasions you want to be like that. There's nothing like digging out a win when you're playing against a superior side. And you do that. Leeds is all about guts and fight, keep fighting, etc. So Dirty Leeds epitomises that. That's one of the reasons why I use it for one of the titles of my books. But it's so evocative of the era and Leeds. And Leeds will always be known as Dirty Leeds. You still get it on Soccer AM. They still call us Dirty Leeds. Fine, suits me.
Love it. Absolutely love it. So talk me through, obviously then we move past that and into the sort of 90s and it sort of maybe simmered down a little bit, possibly, through a number of relegations and not having the fixtures as frequently. But then you kind of touched on it a little bit before, but, the sort of O'Leary, Hullet teams, it sort of came to the boil again.
After Leeds won the title in 92, then in those later years, Chelsea were coming through, so they got money behind them. A lot of foreign players bought in, a bit mercenary around it. So you'd still got the us and them, north and south. So there were a lot of really hard games then. I remember, I think it was just before O'Leary, George Graham. Leeds had 2 players sent off at Stamford Bridge and they came out with a 0-0. So they hated each other. I remember Frank Leboeuf give, who was it, Harry Kewell, a real kicking. He got sent off. They despised each other because you've got this. They ain't champagne footballers. Look at them upstarts. You get that really going through. So all that way in the 90s, there was a lot of that going right through when they got into the Champions League, Leeds. So that was in the days when you got the top 3, top 4, and Leeds were on the outside kicking in, and they found a way into that and gone to the Champions League, and then gambled. Don't really want to talk about, but they gambled, and that's what really screwed them over. But you'd got that real rivalry between then Leeds, United, Liverpool, bit Tottenham, Chelsea, Arsenal, because they were all going for Champions League and the money made a difference. And certainly Abramovich could come in and he could afford to do this, he could afford to put the money in. And people don't like that. People don't like that because it changes the nature. It becomes mercenary rather than your local community. So for me, I'd sooner a team of local lads, and this is what the Leeds fans like. They love a local lad coming through with the spirit. They love Calvin Phillips, adore him. They'd sooner one like him than expensive, import from somewhere else, because they really identify with youth coming through. And, clubs like Chelsea, they've taken people over the years, and we know they're going to languish in the reserves. So that doesn't feel right to me. And you get that real mentality of different clubs and different approaches. It all ties into this. So there were some real set twos over the years between those two sides. They didn't like each other.
Obviously,
yeah.
You've got Bates coming in, as you mentioned before, as chairman. Sort of, it's nothing other than a Chelsea undertone. Sort of wise as manager, Poyet assistant.
I know. Don't remind me. Yeah. Well, we were saying that as well. So all the fans were talking about that. Get the Chelsea out to Leeds. And about Dennis Wise. So you get this thing. They didn't like it, but it was a necessary evil. So Leeds had gambled and failed. They needed someone like Bates to sort that out. They needed someone like later Cellino to sort that out. But very much, Bates came in and he was actually quite welcomed at first. A lot of people didn't like him, but he made a real difference. Some of the things he did in terms of dodgy dealing and the liquidations and all those type of stuff, actually, that was the only way you were going to turn this round. He did make Leeds profitable. I think he was doing it for his own ends, mind, and his ego, but it really made a difference. So we despised him, absolutely despised him. But if he hadn't happened, something else, we could have gone out of business. But as I said before, we nearly went out of business in 2007. And some of the things he did then to keep us going or to retain ownership, absolutely dire. And the fans hated him, really turned against him, really despised him. And it gave them that rallying point again. So actually you need an enemy against which to have a fight. That gives you that team spirit. And it's really bizarre. So enemy within, and some of the things he did to the former directors going through. And he's a really strange guy, Ken Bates. Absolutely bizarre, fascinating.
And then bringing it around to sort of modern day. I probably barely even need to what is going to happen now, basically, post Spygate and all that sort of stuff.
Well, going through, you go back. I mean, it really was a game changer for us getting Bielsa. Absolute game changer. Absolute old school manager. Absolutely love him. The fans absolutely adore him. The players, some of the things they do now, without question, absolutely different club. That made a real difference. 2019, dire. I was there at the playoffs. That was bloody awful because the hope was so great. And this is about Leeds. They can't stand the hope being dashed, but come back after that. Fantastic, wonderful season. And actually really good football as well. Some real dire dips through that, but it's now back where we should be. I do worry that how we adapt to that, whether we need to compromise too much for the ideals, but they're playing really good stuff at the minute. Had some dire results and against the teams you wouldn't expect, but it's really great football. And it's fantastic time to be a Leeds fan with Bielsa, some of the players they've got. I think there is a danger you spend too big and there's real gamble, but I don't think this guy will do that. I do worry about what happens when Bielsa leaves, but you know, appreciate what you've got rather than what's going to happen one day. This is a fantastic time to be a Leeds fan. The last 3 years have been just after so many years of disaster, real desperation. This is fantastic. This is good as it was back in the 2000s, the 90s. Possibly not as good as the Don Revie side, but it'll never be anything like that. But this is a real fantastic time to watch football with Leeds as they are. Brilliant side. And you've got this real togetherness between the fans and them. They love each other. And, you know, take it back, said earlier, this is a fantastic club for that family spirit. We identify with each other. We almost don't want the big expensive foreigners come in. We'd sooner young lads come through. And there's risks in that. So we've got to get the right mix, but absolutely loving it right now. Loving it. But I know it's going to be we're going to have ups and downs between now and the end of the season. And we're playing, as you know, Chelsea in the near future. And that things like that are the acid test. But strangely, bigger sides are the ones we play well against. So I thought we'd lose to Arsenal. I thought we'd lose to Everton. Definitely thought we'd lose to Liverpool. But real hope now. Game against Chelsea would be a real test. A real test.
And bringing it back sort of round, almost flipping it on its head, in terms of Lampard's eyes, he won't have forgot that.
No, he won't.
Lampard, will he?
No, he won't. But you get all that thing about Spygate and all that. Don't cry, Frank Lampard, and then he comes out after the playoffs doing all the mock tears, and we thought, well, we deserved that, didn't we? After trying that, but you know, again, it's a clash of cultures, and for me, the worst was, look, Frank, your guy Jose Mourinho used to do the same. Don't come this self-righteous thing. So I know before we had this real thing all through the way through that year. They started talking about Frank Lampard's Derby County, and that really grated. So it becomes this hero worship of this real golden boy, and that got in there. So people loved it about the Spygate. They loved Bielsa's response. They loved this thing about, okay, did wrong. I admit it. I'll pay the fine myself, because he's a real ethical guy. And you've got this thing, it's the pomposity and the righteousness, self-righteousness. That's what really grated. And you get the reality here. What was supposed to be bolt cutters and combat gear, pair of secateurs and a pair of tracky bottoms, guy on the street outside. The police didn't arrest him. So actually, let's make up a charge. It's not within the spirit of the game. Really? I didn't understand that. So what are you charging us with? Don't know, but we'll change the rules now. So it's obviously it's right. So Frank's right. And then to get the Fair Play Award for Bielsa at the end of the year, he didn't like that, did he? Didn't like that at all. So no, I think there is difficult blood. It'll be an interesting handshake if there is one, or fist bump. Might be bump somewhere else, I think.
Why, in your eyes, has this rivalry stood the test of time then?
I think it's just rooted in a time when most dying-the-wool Leeds fans started supporting them. So it goes back a long way, and it's just become habit. It's the same as United and Liverpool. It's just the habit. So we've got this traditional and love of tradition, but we've got this traditional rivalry with big sides. It makes us feel like we can compete. So a lot of it is about making you feel good about yourself. And if you've got the attention of others like that, people start to respect you. So there's a whole series of things. But when it comes down to it, we don't like them. It's just as simple as that. We don't like them. They're London. They hate us. They despise us. They don't deserve to have done what they've done. You never forget. That's the problem. And some people go, they haven't got a clue about 70 and all that. So they won't know where it comes from. But they know they dislike them. So I don't know. One of the life's imponderables.
But you say almost there, even for the younger generation, it'd be bred into them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, You get the thing in 2010 when they beat United, the same type of thing. And it's just that they hear so much from their fathers and their families, etc., and all the stories and these things that go through. It's ingrained. It's in your veins. It's in your nature. It's in your spirit. So you go along with the singing and the chants and all that, and you get into it. Some of them aren't nice, but it's about family spirit. It's about the community around the club, and everybody dislikes their second cousin. They don't want them coming up to see them. They know they don't give us decent presents, so we always give them a decent one. So it's that type of stuff. It's real, I suppose, really difficult to understand. Real passionate hatred for the other tribe.
If you give a Leeds fan the win over Chelsea or United this year, what are they going to choose?
I really don't know. Whenever both. Hang on, one or the other? Why not both?
Why not both?
Why not both? I would like to say either, both, ideally, but I think stopping in the tracks, like, it's nice to take points off them of any sort. I'm really realistic about this year. This year is about staying up, establishing themselves, and being able to compete. So actually, I'd love to win, but as long as we can compete, I don't mind that. Like the first game against Liverpool, that was fantastic. They thought we'd struggle. They thought we'd get stuffed. What's his face? Virgil van Dijk, arrogant git. We like to put one over on people, and that's win, lose or draw. Lovely to get a win. Wouldn't like to look forward to it, and Leeds fans don't. They don't like tempting fate. Love to get points off them, though.
Will the current crop of players get it?
What, the Leeds players?
Yeah.
I think.
Well, no, both actually.
I can't honestly say about Chelsea. I think it's difficult when you recruit so many players from so many different countries. It's very different. I think Leeds certainly do. They understand this. They've got a real dose of Brit through them. They've got people that have been through this with Bielsa the last few years. They've got a real spirit. Chelsea, it still feels like a lot of Premier League sides. They've put together an expensive cast. Some do really well. I'm not sure about them as a team. I'm not sure about them as the spirit. So I'm not sure about their identification with that. You often used to get the old firm, Glasgow and Rangers, when you got a lot of foreigners in there. They still got it. They still got there because it was all pervading. So I can't honestly say what it's like at Chelsea, so I wouldn't know. Wouldn't have a clue around that. But for the fans, no change there.
And obviously, massive shame that no fans are going to be able to sort of be there to see it.
No, it's terrible, isn't it?
Yeah. People will still care about that much, even though they can't be there.
Oh, I think so. I think so, without doubt. So I know I'm going to be watching on the telly. I finally got my Sky back in, so I know I'm going to be watching it, and I know my dog's going to go run off if we score because I know I'm going to be shouting my head off. So this makes a difference whether you're at home watching it on TV, whether you're there. Nothing like with your fellows in the stadium. Nothing like the atmosphere. But it still means something, means an awful lot. I think social media and the email list have built that up. So you get all this in the background anyway. You still get that community, whether it's there or not. It's nothing like it, of course. But yeah, absolutely. Really big game.
Wonderful stuff. All right, I'll leave it there, but that's perfect. That's absolutely exactly what I was after. Really, thank you for setting the
Great, no problem.